Right now, somewhere in the world, a baby is staring up at a parent's face, watching their mouth move, soaking in sounds it cannot yet understand. Within a year, that baby will speak its first word. Within 3, it will speak in full sentences. Using grammar, nobody ever explicitly taught it. You probably assume this happens automatically, like breathing, like blinking, but the real answer is far stranger. Language has a deadline, and if that deadline passes in total silence, something inside the human brain quietly closes a door that never opens again. Scientists call it the critical period. In plain English, it means this: there is a narrow window early in life when the brain is built to absorb language almost without effort. After that window shuts, the same task becomes one of the hardest things a human mind can attempt. Not impossible, but never quite complete. You lived through this window. You don't remember it closing, but it shaped every sentence you have spoken since. For most of history, nobody could test this directly. You cannot ethically raise a child in total silence just to see what happens to them. So the question of where language actually comes from stayed buried in legend for thousands of years. One of the earliest recorded attempts goes back over 2,000 years to an Egyptian pharaoh named Psamtik I. According to the ancient historian Herodotus, the pharaoh wanted to know which language humans had spoken before all others, the original tongue beneath every other language on earth. So he ordered 2 infants raised by a shepherd who was forbidden to speak a single word in front of them. The children grew up surrounded by goats, fed and sheltered, but wrapped in total human silence. As the story goes, one day the children spontaneously uttered a word resembling bread in an ancient language, and the pharaoh declared that language the original one. Modern science is almost certain the story is legend, not fact. Babies raised without language input do not spontaneously produce a forgotten ancestral tongue, but the experiment, real or not, says something important about you. Humans have been asking this exact question for thousands of years. What happens to a mind that never hears a word? A darker version of the same experiment shows up again in the historical record around the year 1200, attributed to the Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II. According to a chronicler of the time, the emperor wanted to discover humanity's original language too, so he ordered a group of infants raised by nurses, instructed to feed and bathe them, but never speak to them, never coo at them, never sing. According to the account, the infants did not develop language at all. Worse, the chronicler claims they did not survive, as if something essential to staying alive had been withheld along with the words. Historians treat this story with real skepticism, but even as legend, it hints at something science would later prove was painfully real. Silence doesn't just delay language, it can unravel everything language is supposed to build. The first solid evidence arrived in the year 1800 in a forest in southern France. A boy, roughly 11 or 12 years old, was discovered living completely alone in the woods, scarred, naked, and apparently mute. He had survived for years with no human contact at all. He was brought to Paris and placed in the care of a young physician named Jean Itard, who spent years patiently trying to teach him language. The boy, later named Victor, learned to recognize some written words. He learned a handful of simple signs. But true spoken language, the kind built from grammar and recursive structure, never fully arrived for him. Itard eventually concluded that something about the timing of human development had already worked against the boy by the time anyone found him. Victor had missed his window. It would take more than a century for science to give that window an actual name. In 1967, a biologist named Eric Lenneberg proposed what is now known as the critical period hypothesis. The theory was simple but radical for its era. He argued that the human brain has a biologically limited window, stretching roughly from infancy through puberty, during which language can be absorbed naturally, almost like a reflex. Miss that window and full native fluency becomes biologically out of reach, no matter how intelligent the learner is. This wasn't only a theory about vocabulary. Around the same period, linguist Noam Chomsky argued something even deeper was happening inside your skull. He proposed that humans are born with an innate mental structure built specifically for language, sometimes called the language acquisition device. In plain English, your brain doesn't learn language the way it learns math or history facts. It is pre-wired to expect language, the same way your eyes are pre-wired to expect light. Without real input during the right window, that wiring never gets activated correctly. The most haunting confirmation of this theory didn't come from ancient legend. It came from a quiet suburb of Los Angeles in the 1970s. A 13-year-old girl was discovered who had spent most of her life locked alone in a small room, strapped to a chair for hours at a time, almost never spoken to by another human being. She had heard almost no language during the most critical years of her development. When she was finally found, she could barely make a sound. A team of researchers, including linguist Susan Curtis, spent years working with her, trying gently to teach her to speak. And here's the part that should genuinely unsettle you. She did learn words, thousands of them eventually. She could communicate basic needs and describe simple ideas, but grammar, the invisible rule system that lets you string words into infinite new meanings, never fully clicked into place. She could say, "want milk." She could not reliably produce something like, "I want the milk you gave me yesterday." The structure that lets a 5-year-old generate sentences they have never heard before in their life stayed permanently out of her reach. Curtis's research became one of the most cited pieces of evidence supporting Lenneberg's theory. Vocabulary, it turned out, could be learned at almost any age. Grammar could not once the window had closed. The window doesn't care how the silence happened, it only cares when the silence ends. And that's why, somewhere in the world right now, a baby is staring up at a parent's face, listening to sounds it cannot yet understand. Those words might seem meaningless. They aren't. Every sentence spoken into that silence is quietly wiring a brain during the only years it will ever learn language this easily. You don't remember living through that window, but every sentence you've ever spoken exists because you once did. And somewhere in the world, another brain is getting that same chance right now. Because language doesn't just teach you how to speak, it teaches you how to think, and once that window closes, it never opens again.